everyone. My name is Tena Sloan, and I am the host of Early Childhood Mental Health Chronicles. And we are having this podcast today during a really historical and significant time in life across the nation and within the Black community. So I'm really excited about the dialogue that we will have today with some really incredible young men and young Black men. That we are calling this episode Exposed in Early Childhood and Beyond, the Impact of Racism, Adversity, and Trauma on Young Black Boys. And I am personally so excited to have Sean and Antwon Chatmon as our guest today. So welcome, Sean, and welcome, Antwon.
Thank you for having us.
So let me just kind of let everyone know, like, how do I know you, each of you? And again, let me just say, these are some of the most incredible human beings I have ever met. They have inspired me. I had the privilege and the opportunity to have both of Sean and Antwon in my class as an adjunct instructor at Santa Clara University here in the Bay Area. And man, there are just not words to describe Sean and Antwon, but let me try to do that. And as you can see, they look very much alike. They are brothers and they are twins. And yet each of them have a shared sense of strength and a very clear desire, and have been taking loving action to make a difference in their communities and to make a difference in the world. And yet they are their own separate, unique, beautiful people. So thanks to both of you to being here. And I'm so excited about what people are going to be able to hear and how they're going to be impacted by our conversation today.
I am also excited. And again, thank you for having us. It's a wonderful opportunity to just speak and express, especially in times like this where I think we need to have conversations and people need to have something to hope for and something to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm definitely honored. I just feel like, it's my job to use my voice and use my experiences to impact and to move others. And so, with this opportunity, it's awesome.
Yeah, well, great. Well, I'm going to read your bios to give the audience a little bit more specifics around who you are, and then we'll just get going and we'll start talking. So Sean and Antwon, born and raised in East Palo Alto. Sean Chatmon is a lead therapist for the worldwide nonprofit Catholic Charities here in San Jose, Bay Area. He received his master's degree in counseling psychology from Santa Clara University. He has dedicated the last 5 years to working with gang-impacted youth in Santa Clara County. He meets with young people and their families to break vicious cycles caused by systems of oppression, reversing its effects, and establishing self-worth for his clients. Wow. Antwon Chatmon is a passionate, creative, and open-minded young man with a dream of changing the world one person at a time. And it's not a dream, he's doing it right now, every day. After being raised in East Palo Alto, where the lack of resources in his city fueled him to want to make a difference. After receiving a master's degree in counseling from Santa Clara University in 2019, he has continued his fourth year of working with underrepresented youth and families. As a therapist at Catholic Charities of Santa Clara University, he combines a person-centered approach and a cognitive behavioral approach to his work to help clients find clarity and making lasting changes. Wow. So we're also talking right now during the coronavirus pandemic. And now also we are really experiencing the unrest and the pain associated with the most recent killing of George Floyd and all of the other people of color, particularly Black men and Black women who have died at the hands of police enforcement. What have you guys been up to over these last couple of months?
I think, okay, thank you. So, you know, with the coronavirus pandemic and isolation basically being kind of inevitable in various ways, I think I've really been using the time to just really explore, to go deeper, both emotionally, but also thinking about what I value and what I took for granted prior to the pandemic. And, you know, with the recent events of George Floyd's murder and the protests and the different things that are now going on for the Black Lives Matter community and movement, I've just kind of been trying to do my best to be intentional about what I can do differently in my work currently. And, you know, for the time that I get licensed, what I can do with my private practice, if there is a difference there, to support the movement, to support, you know, America and the individuals in America and changing their hearts and overcoming the things that lead to hate. You know, I think that hate is something that's taught. However, if you can challenge your ideals and get more in contact and feel closer to your ideal self, that, you know, with love, some of these problems wouldn't be happening. But I think, you know, people have to get to a space where they have the capacity to love themselves and love others. And, you know, I think that's the overall basis of my work, especially being that I work with gang impacted youth. And as we know, gang violence is the result of hate and misunderstanding. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been using the last few months to do and just strategize on.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's deep, Sean. For me, it's actually somewhat similar and different in certain areas, I guess. One thing that really struck me was the fact that on the week of that ended in March 13th, the Friday, right before, you know, we had the shelter in place kind of issued, I remember just telling all my clients, okay, yeah, I'll see you next week. Look forward to it, you know. And then next week came and I didn't get to see anyone. And so that really has stuck with me. And I've been reflecting on what was I taking for granted? What was maybe interventions or conversations and talk points that I would have had with them had I known that I wouldn't have that opportunity to see them the following week. And so that's something that I've been reflecting on and really trying to see how I can maximize every moment with my clients while still staying true to my approach and my style, and, you know, going at their pace and meeting them where they are, but still also trying to maximize those interactions, because we never know what could happen, you know, moments after, or we don't know if there's going to be another session, you know. And so I've been reflecting on that, as well as going into myself, kind of similar to what Sean was saying, and connecting with my emotions. The shelter in place, you know, I've been more, I haven't been able to go visit everyone that I want to go visit, see my parents, for example, see family members. And so I just try to be as productive as I can on the individual level of how can I go into myself and pull better things out of myself so that I can continue to use my voice powerfully and in a way that is productive. And so that's what I've been spending a lot of time doing. Aside from being an essential worker, I'm thankful that I've been able to still work and have some income. I've been delivering food and such to people who are sick or people who are elderly. So that's also been really rewarding as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So it's really been some deep reflection on yourselves and in relationship to how you want to be and to think about moment by moment opportunities and then how you want to move forward.
Yeah.
How did you both become this reflective and to have such a commitment to your own personal development or your own personal transformation? Sort of part one of the question. And then part two is to be so other intentional about wanting to serve others and impact people in the world around you. Where does this come from?
Tom, do you want to start this one?
I can start. Yeah, I can start this one. That's a good question. I'm like pondering on how I became so reflective, right? I think it's a practice. I think just kind of rooted in prayer and in my faith. I'm Christian, and I think even when I go to God or when I pray, there's a sense of reflection that happens there where I'm reflecting on the things that I want to change and things that I'm grateful for. And so I think that practice of prayer kind of instilled in me. For one, it's kind of meditative, and I see the value of that and recentering yourself and grounding yourself. And so I've always, once I noticed the value in that, I've carried that with me and continued to use that as a practice. But I also see the impact that being self-reflective can have on your individual growth. And to kind of answer the other part of the question, I think, we're all here, we all have certain gifts and we all have a purpose. And I definitely believe that all of our purposes extend further beyond just serving ourselves. So I feel like I've just been connected with my purpose, which I think is to, positively impact people that I interact with or people that come across any piece of me. And that's my goal. And so I think that's what drives me every day.
Yeah. That's well said. I think for me, actually, I think the answer to the second question is kind of what has led me to be more self-reflective. So I think for both of us growing up, we had, caring adults in our life along the different stages of life, starting in elementary school. Well, I guess first starting with our parents and our older sister, and then our aunts and uncles and grandparents, and then going in, as we went through school, we had caring adults who would hold us in for recess and make sure we weren't hanging out with the wrong crowd, or invite us to little things that made us feel like we were important or feel like what we had to offer was important. And I think, as we got older, we would look around and see what some of our peers and some of our family who didn't have those caring adults or those other people who showed concern for them and love for them, and where their life was taking them, or where they seemed to slip and fall and not be able to get back up all the time. And I think that it encouraged us and inspired us to want to help others. And I think, always as a kid, I think friends would say that we always had the embodiment of therapist characteristics. We were always able to sit with people and just talk to them and just sometimes in the moment make them feel better. And I think I found that as I've continued my career as a therapist, that it's important, to make sure myself doesn't get in the way of the work that I'm doing. And I would say over the last 6 years or so, as I was kind of jumping into school to be a therapist, we had life events happen some grief, the passing of my niece, or our niece, I should say, and it just really kind of wowed me and made me reflect on everything that I've been through and how that's gotten me to where I'm at and how important it is for me to build more coping strategies and just become more aware of the troubles that I had so that I can face them and overcome them and then help others do the same.
Yeah.
You both mentioned two things. One was that growing up, you experienced both difficulties, adversities, traumatic events that were painful and continue to be painful. And you also experienced nurturing, caring, family members, starting with your parents and your sister, and then there was extended family and extended community.
Right.
Would you be okay if we delved into both of those a little bit more?
Definitely.
So you grew up in East Palo Alto in the Bay Area, Northern California. Can you both share what it was like growing up in East Palo Alto? And can you also, like, as we think about what's happening right now, the racism and the woundings that have been historical within our communities, you know, is there any way that you can share about that in your own lives growing up?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Twan, do you want to start or?
Go ahead.
Okay, I can start. Okay.
Go ahead. We'll just go back and forth.
Go back and forth. Yeah. So to begin, I mean, we were born in 1992. That year, East Palo Alto was known as the murder capital of the world due to the small square miles of the city and the number of murders that happened during that year. And as we grew up there, obviously we don't have a lot of memories about when we were like first born and stuff, but I just remember growing up in an environment where outside of the walls of our home, there was a perceived danger that was real. You know, people were getting in shootouts daily. Guys were running away from the police. You know, people who were maybe dealing drugs or involved in some kind of street activity were running away from the police and sometimes firing at police. And then, you know, as we got a little bit older, it actually got brought to the home. And in a sense that there began to be people who would try to hide in our backyard or bullets flying through our windows. And those experiences just made, you know, death was around the corner for me. And I think for Antwon as well, growing up, and our parents. And we felt their fear. We felt our own fear. And, you know, every moment became valuable because you didn't know when it was going to be over. It could be while you're sleeping, you know, gunshots ring and we have to get on the ground to protect ourselves. And I mean, I just start with that and kind of pass the torch to Antwon.
Yeah. To piggyback off of that, you know, one of the experiences that strikes me the most is, you know, we had to wait till we were about maybe 8 or 9, maybe even after that, until we could go out to the front yard to play. So just because of the environment that we, you know, were growing up in, our parents didn't feel safe having us in the front yard. The backyard was the safest spot if we weren't inside the house. And so that really stands out to me. And I think those experiences as a youth, I just knew like there has to be something better, you know, out there. And we shouldn't have to deal with this. And then as I got older and educated myself, I realized that a lot of the stuff that we were experiencing was a result of the systemic racism and oppression and, you know, cutting off of resources from one city to the next. And so I realized, you know, the environment was just kind of a result of all of that. Yeah, so I think, go ahead.
And not to skip over, one of our earliest childhood experiences of trauma actually happened when we first entered kindergarten or preschool, sorry, where we had a peer of ours who, you know, in reflection and upon looking back, had to have been, you know, sexually abused or had some kind of history of that sort, and she had both of us actually, you know, kiss on her and touch her and do all of these things, and we just felt we didn't know what we were doing, and we were, you know, 4 years old, and just kind of going along with it because she had kind of commanded that that type of authority, I guess, over us in that moment. And I think, I mean, I know without a doubt that that experience impacted us and impacted even our early ways of demonstrating intimacy and impacted on a deeper level what we thought love was and what it should look like. And it just kind of left us a little scarred and confused when it came to love and intimacy with women and romantic partners. And I think, you know, I mean, that experience, and then you tie in the violence that we were seeing on a daily basis, which ultimately actually led us to go to school in Palo Alto. And that's where we really started to see and experience being the minority and being treated differently, being how stereotypes and prejudice were impacting the way that our teachers would interact with us or not interact with us. And even limiting the way that our peers and their parents wanted them to spend time with us or not spend time with us, and where we got to do those things.
Definitely. Yeah, I think one of the first kind of direct, kind of indirect, I guess it was both, just depending on how you look at it and what part. But we definitely got, I would say, discriminated against in one of our first years in Palo Alto Unified School District, where there was a teacher who just didn't believe that we could be successful in the Spanish immersion class that we were in, and suggested that, you know, we be taken out of the program and that our parents seek professional help for us because we were hyperactive and struggled following her directions, when really we were just adjusting to a completely new environment, completely new people, a new language at the same time, as well as just the way that the classroom was set up. I'm pretty sure it was different than that of our earlier experiences in the academic setting. And so all of those things kind of in one made it seem like we wouldn't be able to be a good fit and that we wouldn't be successful on this route. But, you know, thankfully she was wrong, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. So you're talking about the educational environment and the biases, implicit and explicit, and then just the world around you is giving you messages about who you are and who you were and what value you had and what you were capable of. I just want to note both of you are fluent in Spanish. You do your therapy also in Spanish. So that teacher was absolutely wrong.
Right.
But these are messages that, again, are being put out there in subtle and not so subtle ways. How did that, you know, I'm thinking again about this early childhood period where we're just taking in what's around us, and we don't necessarily, that young child that's 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, an infant that's taking in this environment does not have this ability to filter out what's true about themselves and what's being put on them. And then this happens beyond. So how did this impact you? And then what were the things that then buffered you?
I think it took for me to get older to really realize some of the impacts that it had. I think in the time being, thankfully, we were, you know, they say it takes a village. We definitely had a village around us. And the village continued to grow as we got to new places and met new people and things like that. So I think that that was one of the biggest things that buffered against some of the negative impacts that could have been a result of what we were receiving and, you know, picking up from the world around us. I think our parents were really intentional and did a good job of helping us have positive affirmations and always telling us that we're valuable and asking us, you know, to repeat it. Like, you know, I am valuable. I know who I am. I'm this, I'm that, right? I'm powerful. I'm smart. I'm beautiful. Those kind of things were taught to us from an early age and continue to be taught to us throughout our educational experience, I would say throughout high school, honestly. And I think that those things definitely helped us to persist and to be resilient as we were continuing to develop and push through, you know, being somewhere completely different for school and with hanging out with peers and such that didn't look like us and that weren't from the same environment or circumstances that we were coming from.
Yeah, but it was difficult, you know. I think one of my first experiences involved going to a friend's house who was living in Palo Alto, and then specifically in the Stanford area, and just seeing the peace that that was just in their environment. Like there wasn't even street lights there. Which is its own thing, but they just went about life, you know, they didn't lock their doors. There was just like a relaxed sense of living and not necessarily careless, but just carefree when it came to like security and you know, being on edge and ready to react to gunshots or things like that. Like that was things that we didn't have to worry about in Palo Alto. And I think early in our experiences, it actually made me enjoy being in Palo Alto because it felt safer. And however, it wasn't until, you know, you get an experience like we're walking to Midtown in Palo Alto and a truck, you know, it's raining and a truck splashes a whole bunch of water on us and honks their horn at us. And then, you know, on the back of the truck, we see a Confederate flag. And at the time, not really knowing what that meant, but just being drenched and going like, why would you do that? Why would anyone do that to us? And, you know, to come home to discuss it with our parents and realize like, that's what hate looks like. And that's what, you know, people mistreat each other when they don't care about them and when they don't love them and when they don't understand them or want to understand them. And then Palo Alto then became like, as much of a blessing as it was to be in Palo Alto, it became a space of like uncertainty as well. In East Palo Alto, at least we could expect, we knew what the dangers were. The dangers were gun violence, and that usually happened later at night. And so like, at least we were almost comfortable at home during the day. Like there wasn't shootouts in the day necessarily. But in Palo Alto, you know, we'd be spending the majority of our hours out there, especially daylight hours, and we just never knew when we would come across it. Like, is going to the store okay? Like, what if the clerk doesn't like us or wants to react a certain way or thinks we're stealing, which has happened, right, numerous times to both of us. And even like the microaggressions, right, where in the moment we didn't notice it, but even kids' parents saying, "Oh yeah, they're from East Palo Alto and they're Black, but they're different." And, you know, what does that even mean? As they're discussing maybe with a peer or with somebody about why they're having us over or why we're allowed to be over there. And those are all messages that were kind of planted, but didn't really grow and didn't really we weren't aware of them until later when we reflected and realized like, oh, that's what that was about, or that's kind of where that person was coming from. And that's why we never had stayovers at our house, or you know, nobody ever wanted to come to our house. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Wow. You've brought so many dimensions forward here in terms of physical safety and emotional safety, and the impact of both of those, right? Being able to have a sense of being okay, and are you physically going to be okay? And you really talked about this difference between the impact of uncertainty, to where at least in the environments that you were familiar with, that there was some level of predictability in which you could create your own physical and emotional safety around. Where being in other environments, you're like, well, I don't know, am I going to be received? At any moment, am I going to have some a microaggression that I now have to like suddenly experience, or am I going to be accepted? So as you've been talking, I keep having this thought come through my mind. So how do these two aspects of this question? So how does racism and how does the adversities that you described, that you experienced, which we can extrapolate is representative of experiences that people of color, boys of color, experienced and is experiencing right now. How does this shape the identity and the mental health, especially if they're not getting those intentional, repetitive, powerful messages that you received to sort of combat that, right? So, you know, and think of this like in your own personally, but is there something from your clinical perspective as therapists that you would like to offer to the question?
Right, definitely. I'd say that, you know, trauma, as much of a buzz term that is right now, is something that is different for every individual. So, you know, that experience with, and just reflecting on my own life, I think the experience of the splashing of the water on us, right? Although it shocked us, it wasn't traumatic for me, but it could have easily have been for Antwon, and 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 even just that mistreatment there, in a way, I think it bothered us and it impacted us, but it wasn't traumatic, and maybe it's because, you know, the trauma that we were dealing with was violence and that perceived physical safety, right? And I think that, you know, for people who aren't getting those other messages and that support to kind of buffer these things, first of all, you know, it stops their development. It can make it more difficult to focus in class, right? And then let's just consider those two things. If you're not really feeling safe and you're not able to focus in class, you start to fall behind academically. What does that do to your self-esteem? Does that not only do you now feel like you don't fit in with your peers, maybe because you look different from them, but now you're dumber than your peers, right? And what is the message that then gets sent? And I think there was even elements, even in our life with all the support we got, where my self-esteem was severely damaged. You know, it was like, well, what does being different mean, right? That, as my friend's mom had said, yeah, they're Black, but they're different. And even navigating like this sense of like, so do I have to be perfect to be accepted? You know, is that where my worth is? Is it in my ability to excel in school and to speak kindly and conduct myself with manners, regardless of what's going on internally for me? And I think it even created a space where, you know, without having our parents or each other, where we never would have really been able to express the things that are wrong with us and the things that bother us, because I'm carrying this idea that I have to be good and perfect and strong, right? Um, and so I think it can damage self-esteem and even, you know, self-worth and what you feel like you deserve, what you feel like you can get in this life. And in a lot of ways, you know, the politics and the different experiences that even I still have had have made it harder to dream big. And because it just doesn't seem realistic, you know, you fall into a sense of hopelessness. You know, that the constant anxiety also creates room for depression, and that's happened in my life, right? Being constantly anxious for physical, emotional health, well-being and health and safety, it left us with butterflies in our stomach all the time. And you know, we get off the school bus and we have butterflies about how this walk home is going to go. And as we go to sleep, we're staying up later because we're afraid that if we fall asleep, we won't be able to get on the ground when the shots ring off. Um, and so it's happening in all areas of our life, and the majority of our day, we're walking around anxious. And I think it definitely started to impact my mood and left me just feeling hopeless and like, well, what do I do? Which way do I turn? I'm a little lost here on what should be next for me and what I should be doing.
Yeah. And just to, I guess, to add on to that, because I agree with what Shauna said, as far as my identity, it was kind of like the example that I can think of is kind of like, and it's not in the sense that we want to be prey or prey on others, but in the jungle, there's a food chain, right? Or you see, like, you know, the lion is the king of the jungle. And so at home, we're being loved and we're being, you know, positively affirmed and all of these things, right? And validated that basically we're lions, we're valuable, we're kings. And then at the same time, we realize that either in our own community or outside of that community, we can be hunted, right? We can be poached because of these jewels and values that we have, which then it's like, well, I'm super valuable, but it's almost like I'm so valuable that it's a risk to me now, or it's you know, it's something that puts me in danger. And so then you struggle with that, and then the pressures, because I definitely felt it, of being that model Black person in my classroom, and you struggle with those as well, as like trying to be perfect. And then one other thing that I thought about as far as my identity and my psychological process and well-being was that we were taught, you know, from a young age how to interact with police so that we try to minimize the chance that it goes bad, right? And so what I learned from that, and I don't think it was intentional for my parents to teach me this exactly, but this is how I learned it, and this is what I carried with it, was that I began to intellectualize so much of my experiences, where my emotions became further and further pushed away and pushed to the back burner, where I couldn't access them. And that was just because it was out of fear that if I respond out of anger, out of frustration, or out of fear with this officer, it could go the way that I don't want it to go, right? And so now let me compose myself, almost like training, you know, people in the military to be able to respond in combat, right? Where it's like you can be completely calm even though you are shaking and scared, you know, at the same time. But I have to present a certain way because I can't even have attitude with this officer or it's going to go bad. I can't have attitude with this teacher or they're going to fail me or drop me from their class or treat me differently. And so some of those injustices and mistreatment, we have to just kind of hold on to and then shake off at the same time, which was, you know, extremely tough to do. And like I said, it led me to intellectualizing my emotions. And it wasn't until like college and grad school where I really got to be able to go back and explore and get back in touch with my emotions in a way that I hadn't been for the first 18 years of my life.
Right. And alongside with that, what Antwon's saying was we had to wear different masks. We, you know,
All
you
the
have to
time.
conduct and be a certain way in a classroom. You have to be a certain way on the playground, or kids won't play with you. And when you come back to the community, you can't be wuss. You know, you can't be a wuss. You can't be soft. You have to have a hard front and let people know they can't mess with you, because, you know, there's people all around who are, you know, scraping for resources and maybe even feeling the same type of ways that we're feeling and looking for somebody else to put it out on. And so, you know, to stay safe, and as we got older, especially, you know, early adolescence, it's like, well, I got to be tough here, but I can't bring that same toughness to the classroom, because then it's going to lead to negative consequences for me. And now you're putting on all these different hats, and even, you know, intellectualizing to detach from emotions, but also that anxiety, right? Just always preparing for like, what's next? Okay, I'm getting on the bus. What does this look like then? Okay, while I'm on the bus, I need to be a certain way to connect with my peers and make sure that they don't see the fragile pieces of me, right? But then when we get to school, I got to veer off and go here so that I don't get associated with some of my peers who maybe don't care or are willing to express themselves, so that, you know, people don't look at all of us as like that. And it's like, where even in that is the space to love myself and love my peers, and be proud to be Black, to be proud to be intelligent, you know, if I have to change all of those things just to kind of make it in a different environment.
Right. You're really talking about how there is this vigilance that you have to remain in terms of where you are, who you need to be in that moment, which parts do you have to put forward, which parts do you have to deny and push down in order to keep yourself both physically and emotionally safe.
Right.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing and what you're talking about, and I don't know if this is how you think about it too. I just kind of want to throw it out there that what you're describing is an adaptive way of surviving.
Right.
And that it represents both this ability to be resilient, right? This awareness of what you need to do in order to succeed in whichever environment you're at, and yet the consequences of that is continuing having to cut off parts of yourself, to ignore parts of yourself, to cover up parts of yourself, that you were not free to be who you are. And the fear of, what if you dropped one of these balls, right? What if you misinterpret? What if you are unable in this moment to be tough when you're actually feeling vulnerable, or to be vulnerable? Like, you know, so I'm just like trying to, like, how do I articulate and how do I wrap my mind around this both powerful ability to survive, and yet has allowed you to pursue your dreams, to keep yourselves alive, and to be able to go to Santa Clara University, get your master's degree, work in a work environment, and do the things that are important to you to do. So it represents like these deeper abilities. And yet there's also this sad experience that I end up having as I try to like realize like there's all this fragmentation that's having to happen all of the time.
Right.
just to succeed. How does that land on you as I try my best to put words to what I heard you describe?
Yeah, I think you reflected it perfectly. That was the constant struggle, and that was the experience, right? When you said fragmentation, that's like that word is spot on, right? And there is that fear, and I think the anxiety that Sean was speaking about was not only to prepare us, but also what if I fail, right? Like what you said, what if I'm unable to adapt in this moment? How does that impact me? How does that, pose a threat to myself and my well-being?
Right. And just to add on to that, there's the fear associated with, like, sometimes anxiety is all about trying to avoid something, right? And then I think where things can even be more traumatic for us in our lives was we did all that we could and something still happened. And there goes that sense of safety again, right? And now we're picking up the pieces and trying to figure out where we messed up, where we fell short. And it wasn't until later where you can just realize it's something that's out of your control. And how do you address the feeling of it being out of your control without being hopeless about it, right? And without feeling like, so what's the point in trying, right? And I mean, it's something that we've had to navigate time and time again. I think it's a common struggle for a lot of people of color, for a lot of people dealing with anxiety and depression and trauma. And like like you said, it's we're fragmented, and we're even now we can look at ourselves and say we're successful, but at what cost? And even, sometimes I don't know if everything I did was right or if it was in my best interest, but I think that's what then pushes me to really reflect, really dig up those emotions and the experiences that I detached from, to try to make sure I heal myself in it, or I get what I need to heal, so that I can be, so the person that stands in front of you can be at their best.
Right. And so that we can bring all of ourselves to the table in the future. And I think as we got older, thankfully, we've been able to, we learned to discern where we can be our whole self unapologetically, right? And then we started to gravitate to those spaces. And we also started to detach, I guess, from those spaces that we knew we had to, silence parts of ourselves or things that were going on because we felt like we wouldn't be accepted or we would be, critically judged. And I'm thankful that, in grad school, that was a space where I could be all of me proudly and without any fear or any holding back. And in our jobs, in our workplace, we can also be that, which is awesome.
There are two things that as you're talking, that I feel like we just have to talk about it when we talk about Black boys, when we talk about Black men. The topic of emotions and the topic of vulnerability and the topic of anger.
Yeah.
So, and I'm thinking of lots of these things become ingrained in all of us and in Black boys about, I'm thinking of infants, and I'm thinking about the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, where we're laying the foundation for Black boys. What does it mean to have emotions? What does it mean to be vulnerable or tough? What does it mean to have anger? And what's acceptable, what's not acceptable? When we think about well-being and mental health and wholeness, means that we can operate, like being healthy means operating on the full continuum of emotions. That anger is not bad, but being angry and being a Black man or being a Black boy has certain societal assumptions that are made with that, reactions associated with that, and particularly lethal consequences, of that. So how do we prepare Black boys to grow up to be Black men, and yet have all of these dilemmas and contradictories in messages, and then just what it means to be human. To be human means being angry, and that there is righteous anger, and that anger tells us something, and we can use it to mobilize, to keep ourselves safe, to take loving action, right? But then there's all of this wrapped up in having anger and how you express it if you're a person of color, particularly if you're a Black woman or you're a Black man. What do you have to say about that? Because I don't know, it feels complicated.
It is
extremely complicated.
And
go ahead, Sean.
Thank you. And if I can go, I would just say that the one thing that pokes out to me and that sticks out to me as I even consider my work that I do with youth is the parents, and the systems and the different people who have influence on a young person, right? But also considering that parent or those caring adults who have influence were once youth and infants at some time too, right?
Right.
And I think that part of the danger, even in our culture and even in our community, is that adults have children, right? And are maybe not at their best or haven't really healed and been able to observe and reflect on some of their things from their youth. And so maybe certain things get retaught to their kids, or maybe they're even absent parents because they're still dealing with the stuff that they've been exposed to and maybe are recurrently, exposed to. And how does that influence a young person when they have an issue and they want to bring it to their parents, but their parents are nowhere to be found, whether it's emotional, detachment from the child, or being absent-minded because they're focused on work or focused on something else. And how does that then impact the child? And what happens if they go untreated, right? And what if they go unhealed and unloved, and then have kids of their own? Like, I think that is in part, what part of the cycle was all about. And I think in order to break it, there needs to be accountability by adults who are deciding to have kids and just trying to do their best to prepare for what it will mean to have the influence that parents have, so that the young person can then navigate it with healthy coping strategies, right? These things we learn from our parents of how to express emotions, how to deal with emotions. And if that is a limited perspective that our parents show us, then, we're just growing up to only have a piece of that experience and only learning to express a piece of it.
Yeah. And I think, it's super complex and complicated,
right?
Because it's almost like, in some senses, I feel like the Black culture has internalized some of the societal prejudices and ideas of, we have the angry Black woman, right? Or the aggressive Black male. And in our cultures, oftentimes a lot of that is celebrated, right? To be the toughest person on the schoolyard or on the block, whether that's by using violence or intimidation, it carries some value a lot of times in our communities. And so we just kind of perpetuate that, I would say, unhealthy way of expression and dealing with emotions. And not to mention as Black men, right? And just as men and as boys and men in general, there's that macho-ness that is associated, right? Where a lot of times societally and in our communities and in our families, we're taught not to be sad or, over emotional or sensitive. And so I think that those things just continue to impact us generationally, aside from the anger I feel that as Black people is passed down generationally, because we still live in the systems, we still live under these circumstances that are unfair to us, and that target us in various ways. And so I think like when I see some of the protests right now, I just feel like that's a result of that. And it's a result of otherwise feeling powerless. Here's a time where I feel powerful. And sociologically, right, you have group polarization where, you know, we start to get even more extreme as the crowd builds and as the energy builds. And so I think that's what we see a little bit of today. But yeah, I really don't have an answer as to how to make that change unless it changes in different areas and on different levels, from a systemic level as well as in our community and in our culture. We have to kind of reassign value to the whole spectrum of emotions and accept that as a human, we're going to experience them and embrace that. Yeah, those are just my thoughts.
Yeah. And that, you know, just particularly zoning in on anger, that anger is perceived as bad. But
right.
anger
But it's so
is normal
helpful in some ways.
Yes.
Right.
And that,
right.
you know, when we think about the protests that are happening, and even the violence that comes out of that angry place, that if we keep peeling back the layers of it, right, we could focus on what's out there and get stuck on that. Or we can peel it back and think, okay, what is this anger and this violence telling us that's coming from these groups of people where there is righteous anger?
Right.
There is where the anger that I feel is justified and right. And that when it continues to be ignored and dismissed, and the person or the community has to keep pushing it down and avoiding it like you described, that there is a tipping point to where you can only stuff it down so long. And without having constructive ways to be able to acknowledge, express, and do something with those emotions, it boils and boils until it boils over. And so, you know, I also think when it comes to vulnerability, right, that under anger and aggression and hostility is pain. And when there is a society that says it's not okay to express vulnerability, well, you got to choose one or the other. And so
have to let it out somehow. Yeah.
Right. And so if you can't be vulnerable, then or it feels uncomfortable to be vulnerable, then that means, well, then I have to protect myself. And what's one way that I can protect myself is through anger. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is that all of this is adaptive and a response to systemic and societal and environmental conditions.
100%. Right.
And as we begin to wrap up, you know, I want to offer this thought around how do we look at what's happening from a healing-centered perspective? And a healing-centered perspective has to acknowledge that there is pain and that there are wounds and that there are traumas. And yet, in order for this to change, things do have to happen on an individual level, right? So each of you are talking about what you are doing in your own individual lives to heal and to be the human beings and to be the men and to be the therapists and to be the family members and the societal members that you want to be. So it does include this individual responsibility, recognizing that the ability to take that kind of responsibility is influenced by environmental and societal factors. And so we oftentimes think about trauma and adversity, and we want to hold individuals accountable as if it's an individual thing, when from a healing-centered perspective, and even from a trauma perspective, trauma happens collectively.
Right.
That it doesn't happen individually, but it's happening within communities, it's happening within societies. And I think what we can see when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic, that all of us experience this.
Right.
Yeah.
And that in order to keep each other safe from contracting the coronavirus, that required a collective, unified effort. That what
Right.
I did affected you, and what
Right.
you did affected me. Then if you
Right.
did your part, or if you didn't do that part, that had an influence on my well-being. And so what if we were to think about trauma and
Mm-hmm.
healing from that
Right.
perspective? That it's everyone's responsible for this. That the
Yeah.
systems are responsible for what they have contributed, and then what they need to do in order to shift. And
Right.
then you can break it down from society to governments to communities to
Mm-hmm.
systems that are oppressive to organizations to individuals, that the solution, which is what makes this so complex, is that it's
Right.
not you as the Black boy that grew up to a Black man, that it's your sole responsibility to have to do all of this code switching and behavioral switching in
Right.
order to survive. That the fact that you even have to do that is
It's
not
a
because
part
of
of it.
you, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I get fired up
Yeah.
when I start thinking about
Yeah,
this,
no,
talking
that's,
about
Right.
it.
I feel it.
And I think, you make a good point. And so as complex as it is, I think it's up to each of us as individuals to then decide, what can I offer, right? What is it? What are the things that you do for yourself that are already healthy, and is that something that can be taught to somebody that is struggling more? Or what can these community organizations, what can we do to create space, right, for healing and space for expression, right? As we know as therapists, some of the work gets done when the person just tells you stuff that they never told anybody. And how can our communities create a space for that, but a space that is unified and loving and not looking to tear anybody apart or tear anybody down, but just to be there and to listen and to love, right? To love people in their vulnerability, right? Um, because I think it's only through those experiences where you are vulnerable and the result isn't as bad as you thought it was, or you get love in return, or you get something like a positive reinforcement to it. Can you only continue to be vulnerable and feel safe being vulnerable, feel safe being angry, feel safe with your sadness, instead of being silenced, or instead of being told, in one way or another, we don't have time for that, or we don't want to deal with that. um, and I think everybody needs to look inside into themselves and figure out, one, what they need to do for themselves, two, what they can offer to somebody else, and three, how do you do that? How do you get others on board?
Yeah.
But
And just
that's
to add, I think,
me. And go ahead.
yeah, and I just want to kind of just add to that. I think something that's going to be super essential is that we have everyone value. That's why the Black Lives Matter is so important and so essential, is that it's about valuing Black lives, for others to value them as well as for us to value them, for ourselves, like me valuing myself as well as me valuing my brothers and sisters. And until the point, like, I don't think the change can completely happen until everyone values it, because then that's when the systemic changes will happen. That's when we actually have the bandwidth and the room to change the community in the way that we live. Because until then, it's not safe in certain instances, right? The adaptability, the reason why we see a lot of it is because it's safe for us. It's the way that we survive. And until we can be in a world that embraces and actually acknowledges our value and abides by it, in a sense, that we are humans and that we're just as valuable as everyone else, it may not be safe for us to actually make some of those changes and actually find some of that healing. So I think that's one of the biggest things that needs to happen. And I think it can happen simultaneously. I don't think it has to be one before the other, but I definitely think we need both of them to happen in order for us to really get to where we want to be.
Great, thank you. What I do know about both of you, that you are incredibly creative and musical and artistic in each of your own rights. And I have had the opportunity for you to each share with me about your artistry and your creativity and your imagination and the ways that you have used that. Can you share a little bit about that side of yourselves? We clearly can see your intellectual, your emotional dimensions of who you are, your heart. So I just would love to create this opportunity to show and to give voice to that creative artistry side of yourselves. And how do you use that for yourselves, and how do you use that in your work?
I'll start on this one. The artistry for me, I think, was one of the first opportunities before I found environments in my daily life where I could be all of myself and be vulnerable and be everything without having to worry about a negative consequence from it. And so whether that's through poetry or music or the combination of the two, it was a place where I could just express everything without judging myself for it and without fearing being judged by others. Because I think within the culture of artists, you know, poetry and music, it's embraced for this person to express themselves or to express challenges and such. And so for me, I think that's why it's incredibly important, and it's, you know, top 3 in my self-care for me it's basically me journaling. And I just like to do it in a creative way because then it also challenges me in different ways of digging deep, but then also finding ways to help it be relatable to others. And so for me, that's kind of what it carries for me. And I know that, you know, I won't be a therapist to everybody that I interact with, but I know that my messages could be spread a lot wider and a lot further through music and through art, because I think those are universal languages for people. So that's like why I do what I do and how it helps me.
Definitely agree. You know, my brother and I are very similar in that. And I've really been finding even more recently that there's power from creating and writing and almost like you said, journaling, that maybe some of these things aren't to be shared. Some of these things are just things that kind of get me going in a direction to then create something that I do want to share. And to be okay with that, you know, not to feel like I need to keep everything to myself in one extreme or put everything that I write or touch out to the world, but to also just find my own healing in it. And sometimes it's just for me. Maybe those same words could be healing for someone else, but it's okay to not have to share everything that I write. And like you said, I mean, it's definitely a form of expression. It's definitely challenging, and it can be fun too. You know, I found that some songs that we create or some of the poetry that I have are completely silly and funny, and it just makes me laugh and it makes me think about better things, which, you know, lifts my mood or puts me in a different headspace, and that there's power in that as well. It's a way of not only just expression, but creating a different almost reality through the words and through the art and through the music. So I kind of,
and it's therapeutic too.
It's therapeutic,
yeah.
I really like how, and was struck by the sharing that there is a way of giving expression, and that sometimes the healing part is that you're just acknowledging it to yourself. and yet recognizing that there could be something that once you've been able to acknowledge it and give voice to it to yourself, that you can then find ways to transform that, to give maybe creative expression, to transform it into a creative expression that then could be used to perhaps give voice to someone else's experience, so that so you can then take that and use it to be of help and support to other people. So I really appreciate you both, talking about that art as something that can just be for yourself, and yet it could also be something that can be shared to help others. No, we didn't talk about this and we didn't plan this, so I don't know if either one of you have some of your poetry or your art that you'd like to share now. You don't have to. You have the choice and the empowerment, but if there was something particular that's coming to mind and it feels right, that you'd like to share, you could certainly do it now. Or you could send me something and I'll add it to this podcast. So in a different form. So what do you think?
Okay. Sean, you wanna have anything?
I'm looking for something. I definitely want to share something. So I'm just looking through my notes to see maybe which piece I want to share. Let me see. Do you have anything off the top, Twan? Or anything that you want to share?
Yeah, I do. I could share mine off the top. I just wanted to give you the first, stab at it as we're taking turns and going first. So for mine, actually, Tina, the song that I sent you before, we also have another song that we're going to be sharing very soon. But I can just kind of pull a little piece from the second verse of the song that I shared with you, entitled Fed Up. And it's part of the second verse. So I'll just recite it right now. So I say, the cops keep on shooting and we talk about looting. The flag don't represent me, so I ain't saluting. We tried to take a knee and protest in peace. Now you're about to see what happens when we make it street. A struggle is a struggle, but this one's unique. All lives don't matter when you black as me. Our lives don't matter, officers of peace. Y'all care more about the oil in the Middle East. And that's where I'll stop right there. But it's just, talking about how, I see that we all struggle as humans, but this one definitely is different as humans who are Black, people who are Black. It's so unique, the things that we have to endure and experience. And this is, part of the reason why there are protests going on, why, there's angers and tempers flying, and why, we take a knee and don't salute the flag because we feel like it doesn't represent us, and it doesn't represent our experience. And so that's my little piece for that. Thanks for the opportunity to share it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sean.
I'll share a piece that I wrote a couple of days ago. Again, I'll also just share a fraction of mine, but here it goes. How I'm supposed to love them when they hate me dearly. They hate the riots, want us silent, they ain't trying to hear me. They claim I'm violent, got no priors, now they want to fear me. I know some parents kept my peers from even coming near me.
Wow.
And that was definitely on a reflection of kind of like we were talking about earlier, the youthful experiences with kind of microaggressions and racism and just a misunderstanding. And then obviously the injustices going on now.
Yeah.
Well, all I can say is, wow. And I've been able to hear more of your stories than I've ever heard before, and have had this opportunity, and those that are going to be listening to this podcast have had this opportunity to hear your individual unique experiences, but how it also is so representative of so many others. And really just wanting to use this conversation to bring forward and to bring to light all the many ways that these experiences impact people who are humans that want to have a life that's meaningful and safe, just like everybody else. And so I want to thank both of you for your courage and your perseverance and the ways that you are taking responsibility for your own healing and your own life, and not stopping there, to then allowing to transform the adversities, the wounding, in a way that you then can take what was meant for hate and harm and to help yourselves then to be stronger because of it, and then to be able to be of service to others because of it. And so you have my continued admiration and my continued support to both of you and all the ways in which you are being you, and doing your thing. So thank you to both of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And once again, I just want to say, go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead.
That it's an honor to just have the space to talk about these things, especially with a Black woman. So I appreciate you harnessing and inviting us to be vulnerable and courageous, and to talk about some of these things that maybe we even haven't mentioned to others, and to share that with whoever watches this. So once again, I'm honored to be here and to be able to share my experiences and my thoughts and feelings about everything. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Antwon.
I second that, Tina. Your ability to hold this space, and just even today, but throughout the time of knowing you, was formative for me, especially even as a therapist, right? And facing myself as I prepare to face the struggles and the things that other people face. And you came highly recommended. I think for Antwon, I was like, if you can get in this class, you need to get in this class, because it is gonna change your life. And so I thank you that you have influenced us and impacted our lives in the way that you have, and that because of that, we have also been able to impact the lives of others. So thank you. You're definitely one of those caring adults and authority figures that has influenced us and impacted us for good.
You've been part of that village, yeah, and it's been a blessing, for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and vice versa. Same here. You have impacted me, and you have touched me and my life. Just being able to know you. So thank you for your voice and for being you. And with that, we'll end this broadcast. Exposed in early childhood and beyond, the impact of racism, adversity, and trauma on young Black boys and men. Thank you, and
thank you.
I'll be well.
Thank you.
Was this you, brother? Hey, Juice, let me know, sir.
My homie called the other day, said something on his mind that he gotta say. He asked me how we doing up in San Jose, and said shit been crazy in DTLA. I said, how you doing with the place you stay? He said, thank God that he out the way. Took a moment just to breathe, and we both agreed, although it's fucked up,
hey,
might be what the nation needs.
Sir.
I checked in how he dealing with the way he feeling. He said he ain't really tripping, kinda felt indifferent. Rather see some burning buildings than another killing. I told him I agreed, and this is what he said to me. I mean, the cops don't care about us and the ones we feed. It's some crooked ones that really wanna see us bleed. I just wish that God could hear me and remove the curse. I pray for peace, but
hey,
we gonna
Juice,
need
let
some
me know,
justice
sir.
first. I'm fed up, nigga, get your bread up. They still shooting niggas with their hands up. I'm fed up, homie, pick your head up. They still shooting brothers with their hands up. Though it's been many days, nothing much has changed. We moved on from being slaves, still we getting hanged. We getting hung, look at what this world's become. We won't never all be equal till we fight as one. Cops keep on shooting and we talk about looting. What? The flag don't represent me, so I ain't salute. We try to take a knee and protest in peace. Now y'all about to see what happens when we make it street. A struggle is a struggle, but this one's unique. This one different. Our lives don't matter when you black as me. Our lives don't matter, officer of peace. They care more about
hey,
the oil in the Middle
sir.
East. Shit, and that's just how I feel. Why should I be happy when my people getting killed? Why should I be peaceful when the cops are using violence? If you being quiet, you just killing us with silence. And motherfucker riot, a fire is the energy of ancestors rising. Sirens, just as loud as black mothers crying, trying to stay alive, but the best of me is dying. I'm fed up, nigga, get your bread up. They still shooting niggas with their hands up. I'm fed up, homie, pick your head up. They still shooting brothers with their hands up. Though it's been many days, nothing much has changed. We moved on from being slaves, still we getting hanged. We getting hung, look at what this world's become. We won't never all be equal till we fight as one.